He thought he was stopping a criminal, but he was about to shut down his own career. The bank was quiet in that artificial, fluorescent way that made everything feel a little colder than it should have been. The soft hum of counting machines blending with the faint rustle of paper bills and whispered conversations as customers stood in line, checking their phones, adjusting their jackets, waiting for their turn without knowing they were seconds away from witnessing something they wouldn't forget. Because right in the center of the polished marble floor, under the sharp white lights, stood a woman who didn't look like trouble at all. Angela Carter held her place calmly. Dressed in a simple navy blazer and tailored slacks, her posture straight, her expression unreadable, the kind of stillness that didn't beg for attention but somehow commanded it anyway. And yet across the room, Officer Daniel Brooks had already made up his mind. His eyes narrowed with a certainty that came too quickly, too easily, as if the conclusion had been written before the moment even began. He stepped forward with authority that filled the space before his words did, his voice cutting through the quiet like a sudden shift in temperature, asking questions that weren't really questions, demanding answers he wasn't interested in hearing. And just like that, the atmosphere changed, conversation stopped, heads turned, phones lowered slightly as curiosity replaced routine. Imagine standing there, surrounded by strangers, feeling every pair of eyes settle on you not with concern but with quiet judgment, as if the scene unfolding was already decided and you were simply expected to play your part. Angela didn't raise her voice, didn't step back, didn't argue. She simply looked at him, calm, steady, almost patient, which somehow only made him push harder, because silence like that doesn't challenge authority, it exposes it. Brooks gestured toward the counter, signaling to the staff with a sharp motion that carried more confidence than caution, and within seconds, the tension thickened. The tellers exchanged uneasy glances, one of them hesitating just long enough to suggest something wasn't right, but not long enough to stop what was already in motion. And then came the first real mistake, not the accusation, not the tone, but the decision to act on it publicly, to escalate in front of everyone, to turn a quiet bank into a stage. He instructed her to step aside, his voice louder now, firmer, drawing a circle of attention that tightened with every passing second. A few customers began to whisper, others subtly raised their phones, not yet recording but ready, sensing that something about this moment was different, that it wasn't just another routine check. Angela reached slowly into her bag, not in fear, but with intention, her movements controlled, deliberate, as if she understood something no one else in the room did. And for a brief second, there was a flicker of hesitation in the air, a pause so small it almost didn't exist, but it was there, and then it was gone, replaced by the officer's insistence, his confidence swelling as the crowd's attention fed it. He didn't notice the way one of the bank employees stepped back toward the office, didn't catch the subtle glance exchanged between two men near the entrance, didn't realize that the cameras watching this moment weren't just mounted on the ceiling, because while he believed he was taking control of the situation, something else was quietly unfolding beneath the surface, something patient, something precise, something that had already anticipated every word he was about to say. And Angela Carter, standing there in the center of it all, didn't look like someone losing control. She looked like someone waiting for the exact moment when control would reveal itself for what it truly was. Officer Daniel Brooks took a step closer, his presence filling the space in a way that made the air feel heavier, tighter, like the room itself was leaning in to watch what would happen next. His jaw set, his tone sharpening as he repeated his demand, not because he needed an answer, but because he expected obedience. And when Angela Carter finally placed her bag on the counter, it was not with hesitation, but with a quiet precision that seemed almost out of place in the rising tension, the kind of movement that belonged to someone who understood exactly where she stood, even when everyone else had already decided she did not belong there. The zipper slid open with a soft sound that somehow echoed louder than the murmurs around them. And for a brief moment, everything slowed. The counting machines continued their steady rhythm. A pin dropped somewhere in the distance. A phone vibrated against marble. But all attention remained fixed on her. Hands, steady, controlled, unshaken, Brooks leaned in slightly, watching closely, as if expecting to catch her in something. Anything that would confirm what he had already convinced himself was true. But what he did not notice was how little she reacted to him, how her breathing stayed even, how her eyes never darted or searched for escape, because she was not trying to get out of this moment. She was allowing it to unfold. And that difference was everything. Imagine being surrounded by strangers who have already judged you without a single piece of evidence. Imagine feeling the weight of their silence pressing against you. Not one voice stepping forward, not one person questioning what they were seeing, just quiet acceptance as if this was normal, as if this was expected. Brooks gestured toward the contents of the bag, instructing her to take everything out, his voice louder now, carrying across the polished floors, making sure no one missed what he believed was authority in action. Angela complied without a word, placing each item carefully on the counter, a wallet, a notebook, a pen, nothing unusual, nothing suspicious, and yet the tension did not ease, because this was never about what was in the bag. It was about what he thought he saw before he even approached her. One of the tellers shifted uncomfortably, glancing toward the back office again, her fingers hovering near the phone as if debating whether to make a call she was not supposed to make. Near the entrance, the two men who had exchanged glances earlier were now standing a little straighter, their attention no longer casual, their focus locked on the center of the room. But Brooks did not see any of it. His world had narrowed down to one goal: to prove himself right, to assert control, to close the situation in a way that made sense to him. And in doing so, he crossed the line he did not even realize existed. He reached for her identification without asking, his movements quick, decisive, the kind of action that assumed permission instead of requesting it. And for the first time, Angela's hand paused, not pulling away, not resisting, just stopping long enough to create a silence that felt different from the others, heavier, more deliberate. Their eyes met again, and this time, there was something new in hers, not fear, not frustration, but a quiet certainty, the kind that does not need to be spoken out loud. And in that still moment, something shifted, not in the crowd, not in the room, but in the direction of everything that was about to happen. Because while Officer Brooks believed he was one step away from resolving the situation, he was actually stepping deeper into something far bigger than he could see. And Angela Carter, standing there with her belongings spread neatly across the counter, was not losing control. She was waiting for the exact second when the truth would no longer need her to say a single word. The silence stretched just a fraction longer than it should have, the kind of silence that makes people shift their weight without realizing it, that makes the air feel like it is pressing gently against your chest. And in that space, Angela Carter slowly released her grip, allowing Officer Brooks to take the identification he had already decided belonged to someone he did not trust, his fingers brushing the edge of the card with the confidence of a man who believed he was seconds away from confirmation, from closure, from proving that his instincts were correct. But instincts are not facts, and certainty without understanding has a way of collapsing when it meets something real. He glanced down briefly, not fully reading, not fully processing, just enough to see a name, a photo, something that did not immediately align with what he expected. And instead of pausing, instead of reconsidering, he doubled down, because backing away would mean questioning himself, and that was not something he was used to doing. His voice rose again, louder now, sharper, instructing her to explain what she was doing at the bank, why she had been near a restricted account desk, why the staff seemed uneasy, questions layered on top of assumptions, each one building a version of reality that only existed in his mind. Angela listened, not interrupting, not correcting, her gaze steady, almost distant, as if she were hearing something she had anticipated long before it was spoken. And across the room, the subtle movements continued. The teller who had hesitated before now stepped fully into the back office, her hand finally lifting the phone, her voice low but urgent as she spoke words no one else could hear. Near the entrance, the two men shifted positions again, no longer pretending to be customers, their posture straightening, their attention sharpened, one of them adjusting his jacket slightly, as if preparing for something that had already been set in motion. But none of it registered to Brooks. His focus locked, his world narrowed, his confidence feeding on the attention of the crowd that had now fully formed a quiet circle around them. Phones raised just a little higher, whispers growing slightly louder, the energy of the room shifting from curiosity to anticipation, because people could feel it, even if they did not understand it, that this moment was building towards something, that it was not going to end the way it started. Imagine standing there knowing that every second that passes is bringing you closer to a truth no one else can see yet. Knowing that the outcome is already written, not by emotion, not by reaction, but by something far more precise. Angela finally spoke, her voice calm, even, cutting cleanly through the noise without needing to rise above it. She did not argue. She did not defend herself. She simply said, "You should take a closer look at that identification." The words landed softly, but they carried weight, the kind of weight that does not demand attention but commands it. Brooks frowned slightly, irritation flickering across his face as he looked down again, this time longer, this time actually reading, his eyes scanning the lines. The title, the insignia, and for the first time since he had stepped into this situation, there was a pause in him, a real pause, not hesitation, but something closer to confusion, something that did not fit into the narrative he had constructed. And in that exact moment, before he could fully process what he was seeing, before he could decide how to respond, the glass doors at the front of the bank opened with a controlled, deliberate motion, not rushed, not chaotic, just precise. And the shift in the room was immediate, subtle but undeniable. The whispers stopped, the movement stilled, and even Brooks felt it, though he did not yet understand why. Because the moment he thought he was controlling had just changed direction, and Angela Carter, standing exactly where she had been from the start, did not move, did not react, because she had never been waiting for his realization, she had been waiting for theirs. The sound of the glass doors closing was soft, almost polite, but it carried a weight that rippled through the room like a shift in gravity, subtle yet undeniable, the kind of change people feel before they understand, and one by one, heads turned toward the entrance. Conversations that had already faded now disappeared completely, replaced by a stillness that did not belong in a place like this. 3 individuals stepped inside, their movements measured, their presence calm but unmistakably purposeful, not loud, not aggressive, but precise in a way that made space for them without a single word being spoken. Their eyes scanned the room not with curiosity but with recognition, as if they already knew exactly what they were looking for. And that was the moment Officer Brooks felt it. Not fear, not yet, but something unfamiliar, a crack in the certainty he had been holding on to. His posture stiffened slightly as he glanced up from the identification still in his hand, his mind trying to reconcile what he had just read with what was now unfolding in front of him. The insignia on the card no longer a detail to dismiss, but a detail that refused to be ignored. Across the counter, Angela Carter remained exactly as she had been, composed, still, her gaze steady, not on the new arrivals, not on the crowd, but on him, as if this moment was not a surprise but a confirmation. The individuals approached with quiet authority, one of them speaking in a tone that did not need to be raised to be heard, asking a simple question that carried far more weight than its words suggested. "Is there a problem here?" It was not a challenge, not an accusation, just a statement that invited truth. And for a brief second, Brooks hesitated, the kind of hesitation that comes when 2 versions of reality collide. The one he believed he controlled, and the one now stepping into view. He straightened, attempting to regain the ground he felt slipping, his voice returning but lacking the sharp edge it had carried before, explaining the situation in clipped, controlled sentences, framing it as procedure, as caution, as responsibility. But even as he spoke, the narrative felt thinner, less certain, because the room had changed. The audience was no longer passive. The energy no longer supported him. The 2 men near the entrance now stood fully alert, no longer blending in, their attention aligned with the new arrivals, forming an unspoken connection that did not require introduction. One of the agents extended a hand calmly toward Brooks, not forcefully, not urgently, just enough to request what he already held, the identification card. And this time, Brooks did not resist, his fingers releasing it with a subtle reluctance that spoke louder than any words he could have chosen. The agent glanced at the card briefly, then at Angela, a nod, passing between them so slight it could have been missed by anyone not watching closely. But it was there, confirmation, recognition, authority meeting authority, and in that instant, the balance of the room shifted completely. The quiet circle of onlookers no longer leaned toward the officer, their attention drawn instead to the woman who had never raised her voice, never stepped back, never broken the calm that now made sense in a way it had not before. Brooks felt it fully then. The realization not as a sudden shock, but as a slow, undeniable weight settling in. Every assumption he had made, every step he had taken, now standing exposed in a light he had not anticipated, and Angela Carter finally moved, just slightly, reaching for the card as it was returned to her, her fingers closing around it with the same controlled precision as before. Her voice when she spoke was quiet, steady, and final. Next time, take a moment before you decide who belongs. The words were not loud, not dramatic, but they carried through the silence of the bank with a clarity that left no room for misunderstanding. And in that moment, Officer Daniel Brooks was no longer the center of the scene he had created. He was simply standing inside the consequences of it, while the woman he had tried to control had never lost control for even a second. The words lingered in the air long after Angela Carter had finished speaking, not because they were loud, but because they landed exactly where they needed to. And for a moment, no one moved, no one spoke. The entire bank suspended in that thin space between realization and reaction. Officer Daniel Brooks stood still, the weight of what had just unfolded settling over him piece by piece, not as a single overwhelming shock, but as a series of small, undeniable truths that refused to be ignored. The badge on his chest no longer felt like authority. It felt like something being quietly examined from every angle in the room. The agent who had stepped forward earlier shifted slightly, his attention now moving beyond Brooks, scanning the bank with a focus that suggested this moment had always been part of something larger, because it had, and Angela had known it from the beginning. She reached calmly for the items still laid out on the counter, placing them back into her bag, with the same deliberate care, not rushed, not flustered, as if the tension that had filled the room moments ago had never touched her at all. And in a way, it had not, because she had never been reacting. She had been observing, waiting, allowing the situation to reveal itself fully before stepping into it. Imagine watching a moment unfold where someone tries to take control, only to realize they were never the one in control to begin with. The tellers behind the counter exchanged looks that were no longer uncertain but clear, their earlier hesitation now replaced by a quiet understanding of what they had almost interrupted. One of them stepped forward slightly, her voice careful but respectful as she addressed Angela, asking if everything was all right. And Angela gave a small nod, not dismissive, not cold, just enough to acknowledge without shifting the focus away from what truly mattered. Because this was never about her comfort. It was about the truth that had just surfaced. Near the entrance, the two men who had been watching from the beginning now moved closer, no longer blending into the background, their presence aligning seamlessly with the agents who had entered moments before, forming a silent structure of authority that did not need explanation. And then came the part no one had expected, not a confrontation, not raised voices, but quiet coordination. One of the agents spoke briefly into a device clipped to his jacket, his tone low, controlled, relaying information that extended far beyond the walls of the bank. And suddenly, the scene that had felt contained began to stretch outward, as if invisible lines were connecting this moment to something much bigger. Brooks felt it completely now, the realization that this was not an isolated incident, that his actions had not just affected one person in one moment, but had intersected with something already in motion, something organized, precise, and far more powerful than his assumptions. His gaze shifted from Angela to the agents, then briefly to the crowd that had witnessed everything. The phone still raised, the eyes still watching, and for the first time, he understood that this was no longer a situation he could manage, no longer a narrative he could control. Angela closed her bag and rested her hand lightly on the counter, her posture unchanged, her presence steady, and when she finally looked around the room, it was not with triumph, not with satisfaction, but with a quiet clarity, as if she were seeing everything exactly as it was, nothing more, nothing less. The agent beside her nodded once more, this time more formally, acknowledging her role, her position, and the operation that had just taken a decisive turn. And in that moment, the bank was no longer just a bank. It was part of something unfolding in real time, a piece of a larger truth coming into focus. And Officer Daniel Brooks, who had walked in believing he was enforcing order, now stood in the center of a situation that had exposed something far deeper than a simple mistake. something that could not be undone, only understood, as the quiet machinery of justice, patient and precise, continued moving forward without needing to raise its voice. The shift did not stop at the edges of the room. It continued, quietly extending beyond the walls of the bank, threading through conversations, through signals, through decisions being made in places no one here could see. And inside that stillness, the agents began to move with a coordination that felt almost invisible, not rushed, not dramatic, just precise, as if each step had already been mapped out long before this moment arrived. One agent approached the counter, speaking softly with the bank manager who had now emerged from the back office, his earlier confidence replaced with a careful attentiveness, his posture slightly lowered, his words chosen with more caution than before, because the presence in front of him demanded it without ever asking. Angela Carter stood just to the side now, no longer the center of attention and appearance, but undeniably the center of everything unfolding. Her role shifting from subject to anchor, from questioned to unquestionable, and still she said nothing more, because she did not need to. The situation was now speaking for itself. Imagine realizing that what you thought was a single moment of authority was actually a small part of something much larger, something that had been unfolding quietly while you believed you were in control. Officer Daniel Brooks felt that realization settle deeper, his shoulders no longer squared with the same certainty, his stance no longer commanding but uncertain. As if the ground beneath him had subtly changed, he watched as the agents spoke with the staff, as documents were requested, as quiet confirmations were exchanged, each interaction smooth, professional, undeniable. There was no chaos, no raised voices, just a steady unraveling of something that had been hidden in plain sight. Near the entrance, the two men who had been observing since the beginning now revealed small details that had gone unnoticed before: a badge briefly visible, an earpiece catching the light, signals that, once seen, could not be unseen, and in that moment, the realization expanded again. This had never been a random stop, never been a simple misunderstanding. It had been part of an operation, layered, deliberate, patient. Angela's earlier stillness now made perfect sense. She had not been enduring the situation, she had been allowing it to reach its natural conclusion. Because sometimes the truth does not need to be forced, it only needs the right moment to be seen clearly. Brooks glanced around the room, the same faces still watching, but now their expressions had changed, no longer curious, no longer quietly judgmental, but reflective, as if they were replaying the moment in their minds, seeing it differently now, understanding what they had witnessed from a new perspective. The phones that had been raised earlier were still there, but the purpose behind them had shifted, no longer capturing a scene of authority, but documenting a moment of revelation. Angela adjusted her sleeve slightly, a small movement, controlled, grounding, and for the first time since everything began, she allowed her gaze to move beyond the immediate circle, taking in the entire room, not with scrutiny, not with emotion, but with clarity, the kind of clarity that comes from knowing exactly where you stand in a situation that has finally revealed itself. One of the agents returned to her side, speaking quietly, a brief exchange, efficient, confirming that the next steps were already in motion, that what had started here would not end here. Because it never does. The consequences of moments like this do not stay contained. They move, they ripple, they reach places that the original moment never touches. And in that understanding, there was a quiet finality to everything that had just occurred. Officer Brooks remained where he was, no longer directing, no longer intervening, simply present in a moment that had moved beyond him. His earlier certainty replaced with something far more complex, something that did not have a quick resolution. Angela Carter, who had been at the center from the beginning, now stood as the one constant in a situation that had shifted around her, her calm never broken, her position never uncertain, because while others had reacted, assumed, and acted without seeing the full picture, she had always known exactly what that picture was, and she had been waiting, patiently, for everyone else to finally see it too. The room no longer felt like a place of routine transactions. It had transformed into something else entirely, something heavier, more deliberate, as if every second now carried consequences that stretched far beyond what anyone had expected when they first walked through those doors. The agents continued their work with the same quiet precision. But now there was a new layer to it. Not just observation, not just confirmation, but action, measured and controlled. One of them spoke with the bank manager again, this time with more clarity, more direction, requesting access to specific records, specific accounts, the kind of requests that did not come from suspicion but from certainty. And the manager, who had once stood behind his desk with casual authority, now moved quickly, almost instinctively. As if understanding that hesitation was no longer an option, Angela Carter remained composed, her presence steady. But there was a subtle shift in her now, not in posture, not in expression, but in purpose. She was no longer waiting. The moment she had allowed to unfold had reached its turning point, and everything that followed would move forward without needing her silence. Imagine watching a scene where the truth does not arrive with noise, but with quiet inevitability, where every small detail begins to align until there is no room left for denial. Officer Daniel Brooks stood just outside the center of it all now, not removed, but no longer involved, his role reduced not by force, but by the simple presence of something greater than his authority. His mind replayed the last few minutes in fragments. The initial assumption, the tone of his voice, the way the crowd had responded, and now, the way that same crowd looked at him, not with fear, not with respect, but with something else entirely, something closer to understanding, and that understanding did not favor him. Across the room, one of the agents approached the two men who had been positioned near the entrance, their quiet exchange, confirming what had already been implied. This had been coordinated, monitored, prepared for. The pieces had been in place long before Officer Brooks had decided to act, and that realization carried its own weight, because it meant that this moment, the one he believed he had created, had never belonged to him at all. Angela stepped forward slightly, not to take control, but to align with it, her voice low as she spoke to the agent beside her. A brief exchange of information, concise, focused, the kind of communication that does not waste time because it does not need to. And in that moment, the larger picture became clearer, not just to those directly involved, but to anyone paying close enough attention. This was not about a misunderstanding at a bank. It was about something embedded deeper, something that had required patience, observation, and the right conditions to surface. The teller who had made the call earlier now stood quietly behind the counter, her earlier uncertainty replaced by a quiet relief, as if she had sensed something was wrong but had not known how to act until now. The customers, still gathered, still watching, had shifted from passive observers to witnesses, their presence no longer feeding tension, but holding it, containing it, giving it weight, because moments like this do not disappear. They stay, they echo, they become something people remember long after they leave. Officer Brooks adjusted his stance slightly, a small movement, but one that reflected the larger shift within him. The certainty that had once defined him now replaced by a need to understand, to process, to reconcile what had just happened with what he thought he knew. And yet, there was no immediate resolution, no clear path to undo what had been set in motion, because some actions, once taken, do not reverse, they only lead forward. Angela Carter, standing now beside the agents who had entered with quiet authority, was no longer part of the scene as it had begun. She was part of what it had become, a moment of clarity, of exposure, of truth stepping into the light without needing to force its way there. And as the agents continued to move through the bank, gathering what they needed, confirming what they already knew, the realization settled fully into the room. This was not the end of something. It was the beginning of everything that would follow. The movement inside the bank continued with quiet certainty, no longer building tension but releasing it in controlled, deliberate steps, as if everything that had been tightly held beneath the surface was now being carefully brought into the open, one document at a time, one confirmation after another. The agents did not rush because they did not need to. Every action they took carried the confidence of preparation, of knowing exactly what they were looking for and exactly where it would lead. The bank manager stood beside them now, no longer guiding the space but following instructions within it, his earlier authority replaced by a careful cooperation, his voice lower, his movements more measured, as if he understood that every word, every gesture now mattered in a way it had not before. Angela Carter observed it all without stepping ahead of it, Her role no longer required her to lead, only to remain present, to ensure that what had begun reached its intended conclusion, and in that stillness, there was a quiet power, not loud, not forceful, but undeniable. Imagine watching a system begin to reveal itself piece by piece, not through chaos, but through clarity, where every small detail that once seemed ordinary now fits into a pattern that cannot be ignored. Across the room, one of the agents received a brief update through his earpiece, a slight nod signaling that something beyond these walls had already been set into motion, that what was happening here was only one part of a much larger sequence unfolding simultaneously. The two men near the entrance repositioned again, this time closer to the doors, their presence forming a quiet boundary, not to contain the situation, but to define it, to ensure that what needed to happen would not be interrupted. The customers who had remained began to shift subtly, not leaving, but adjusting their attention. No longer tense but focused, as if they understood they were witnessing something significant, something that would not repeat itself in the same way again. Officer Daniel Brooks stood where he had been, but everything about that position had changed. The center he once occupied now belonged to something else entirely, something structured, something deliberate, and for the first time, he was not part of the action, he was outside of it. Looking in, his thoughts no longer driving the moment, but trying to catch up with it. The badge on his chest felt heavier now, not because it had changed, but because his understanding of it had. Authority, he realized, was not just about presence, it was about awareness, about knowing when to act and when to step back, and that distinction had not been clear to him before. Angela shifted her gaze briefly toward him, not with judgment, not with satisfaction, but with a quiet acknowledgement, as if recognizing the moment for what it was, not personal, not emotional, but instructive, the kind of moment that reveals more than it punishes. One of the agents approached her again, speaking softly, confirming that the necessary records had been secured, that the next phase was already underway, and with that confirmation, the atmosphere changed once more, not with tension, but with resolution, the purpose that had filled the room now moving forward, beyond this space, beyond this moment, into something that would continue long after the bank returned to its routine. Angela gave a slight nod, a simple gesture that carried finality, and then she stepped back, not away from the situation, but out of its center, allowing the process to continue without her direct presence. Because her role here was complete, the truth had surfaced, the structure had responded, and the outcome was already in motion. Officer Brooks remained still for a moment longer, watching as the agents continued their work, as the manager followed their direction, as the room slowly began to breathe again, and in that quiet return to movement, there was a realization that settled deeper than anything else. This had not been about control, it had been about understanding, and understanding, once revealed, does not disappear, it stays, it reshapes, it redefines, and as Angela Carter turned slightly toward the exit, her steps calm, unhurried, she did not look back, because she did not need to. Everything that needed to be seen had already been made clear. The glass doors opened once more, but this time there was no tension attached to the sound, no shift in the air, no ripple of uncertainty, just the quiet continuation of a moment that had already reached its conclusion. Angela Carter stepped forward with the same calm presence she had carried from the beginning, her pace steady, her expression unchanged, as if everything that had just unfolded was simply another step in a path she had already walked many times before. Behind her, the bank slowly began to return to its rhythm, the low hum of machines resuming, the murmurs of conversation cautiously rebuilding. But nothing was the same, because moments like this do not reset a room. They leave something behind, something subtle but lasting. Officer Daniel Brooks remained where he stood, his posture no longer rigid, no longer driven by assumption, but quieter now, reflective, his eyes following her for a brief second before lowering slightly, not in defeat, but in understanding. The kind that does not arrive all at once, but settles in layers, replaying every decision, every word, every glance. Imagine standing there realizing that the moment you thought defined someone else has now redefined you instead. The badge on his chest still carried the same weight, but it felt different now, not as a symbol of control, but as a responsibility he had not fully understood until this moment. Across the room, the agents continued their work, their movements steady, their focus unchanged, because while this moment had reached its end for some, it was only a continuation for them, one piece of a larger system that does not pause, does not react, but moves forward with quiet precision. The bank manager stood nearby, speaking in low tones, his earlier confidence replaced with a careful awareness of the role he now played within something far greater than daily operations. The customers who had witnessed everything began to shift, some returning to their transactions, others lingering just a little longer, as if trying to hold on to the clarity they had just seen, because clarity like that does not come often, and when it does, it stays with you. Angela reached the doorway and paused for the briefest moment, not to look back, not to check what had been left behind, but simply to stand. In that space where everything had changed, her hand resting lightly against the door as it opened again, the sunlight outside softer, warmer, a contrast to the controlled stillness inside. And then she stepped out, leaving the room exactly as she had found it, but not the same, because she had never needed to change the space, only reveal what was already there. Officer Brooks took a slow breath, the kind that comes when everything settles, when the noise fades and what remains is something quieter, something more lasting. He did not speak, did not move to follow, because there was nothing left to say in that moment. Only something to carry forward, something to remember, something to learn from. And as the doors closed behind her, the final realization settled into place. Not loud, not dramatic, but clear. He thought he was the law. But that day, the law did not raise its voice. It simply stood there, patient, unshaken. And when the moment came, it revealed itself without needing to prove anything at all.